Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why in the world am I reviewing a Kia Picanto GT-Line? But let me explain. I drive and review a fair few cars these days. Cars for the enthusiasts, cars for the family, and even trucks you can use for work and play. But what if you don't care about performance and you don't need the space to haul the family or stuff around? What if all you want is a cheap runabout? Well, that got me thinking. What do you get these days when you buy a cheap car? This Picanto GT-Line is one of the cheapest cars you can buy brand new today. My name's Nish and you're watching The Word on Cars. Let me show you what you get when you pay under $24,000 for a car in 2024. This generation of Picanto has been around since 2017, and although it looks very different to the outgoing model, this isn't an all-new Picanto. Instead, Kia's given it a major refresh, and I think it looks pretty darn good. And it's tiny, which makes it the perfect car for cities or for people that just need a car to get from A to B. Now, this GT line is actually the most expensive Picanto you can buy. The range starts at just over 21 grand for the Picanto Sport Manual and tops out at $23,990 drive away for this GT line with an auto. And options-wise, you get 7 colors to choose from. Clear white is a no-cost option, while the rest will cost you $520, taking the drive-away price of this one up to 24.5 grand. If you want to save a few bucks on the second-hand market, there are near-new Picantos like this one, which is for sale at Blinker here in Melbourne, for under 23.5 grand with the full factory warranty and an extra 3-year warranty for my viewers. So if you find yourself a Blinker, remember to tell them that you saw this one on The Word on Cars. On styling and being a GT line, I have to say that this little hatch looks much sportier than it actually is. It's got Kia's new futuristic corporate face with what they call the Tiger Nose grille, along with LED headlamps and a light bar, and sporty bumpers that actually give this an angry look. Massive 16-inch shoes on its corners, side skirts, LED tail lamps, and even a rear bumper that has a slightly different diffuser compared to the base model. And Kia hasn't bothered with fake exhaust tips back here. No, in fact, they've hidden the exhaust completely. And on the inside, Kia hasn't made too many changes to the way it looks in here. Like the previous model, it's plastic fantastic, but it's not a bad looking interior at all when you consider how much the Picanto costs. And you don't get smart keyless entry to get in either. You get an old school key fob to unlock this hatch, and you'll need to pop said key into the ignition to wake this thing up. Oh, and when you do start this thing up or shut it down, it plays a welcome sound that makes you feel like you're on a game show. Cracks me up every time. Space in here is also surprisingly good for the front passengers. At 5 feet 9 inches tall, I have tons of headroom, decent leg and knee room, and I reckon even taller folk will fit in the front without any issues, but it won't be a great ride for anyone sitting behind you. More on that one later. The seats are also comfortable enough. You get two-tone faux leather trim with white stitching, but they're not electric, so you'll have to work these manually. And you do get tilt adjustment for the steering wheel, but unsurprisingly, no reach adjustment. Now, when it comes to tech, you get a decent bit of kit in this cheap hatch from Kia. There's an 8-inch touchscreen with the usual gizmos, no navigation though, but you do get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration, which is really all you need. I've always liked this system. It works well, responds well, and does the job. There's also a 6-speaker stereo in here. If you like deep, clear bass, you're not going to be a fan of this one. But overall, it sounds okay. You also get a hotkey to set up any other functions you want to pull up quickly, which all Kias have, and a great idea. The refresh also throws in a digital instrument cluster. Well, sort of. You have a digital speedo and tach, but it's not exactly a full color screen, so forget about configuring this any other way. You can choose between a few themes, but all that does is change the color. There's a 4.2-inch supervision screen, as Kia calls it, to flick between driver assistance, trip computer, and a settings screen. And again, nothing fancy and just does the job. Speaking of driver assistance tech in here, this is one of the biggest changes to the Picanto because this now gets forward emergency braking, lane keeping assist, which will follow the lane, blind spot assist, safe exit warning so you don't open the door into an oncoming car, rear cross traffic assist, and a reverse camera with active grid lines. Still no adaptive cruise control though, so it won't speed up or slow down on its own. Instead, you get standard cruise control, so you'll need to keep an eye out on the car in front of you. Everything I've just mentioned is controlled using the buttons on the steering wheel and includes another hotkey for favorite functions, which in itself isn't too bad. You have perforated leather grips on either side and a flat bottom for a sportier look and feel. And speaking of sporty, the Picanto also gets aluminium pedals that actually look quite nice. Now, you don't get automatic climate control in here either. That's sorted out through manual controls on the center stack for a single zone, so you'll have to fight over the temperature in here. And you get an ordinary looking gear lever that looks like a chuck top. If you live in Australia, you know what I'm talking about. And no manual mode either, just a good old fashioned automatic. Space-wise, this tiny hatch gets a surprising amount of space with a good-sized glove box on the dashboard, split levels of storage on the center stack along with a 12-volt power outlet, USB-A and USB-C ports, a couple of cup holders that can be spun out of the way, space under the handbrake, a little more space under the center armrest, and door bins with bottle holders, which isn't too bad when you consider how small the Picanto is. And when it comes to the back seats, it's pretty cramped back here. Now, even with the driver's seat set to my driving position, there's bugger all space for my knees, although headroom is actually pretty good, and there's plenty of space under the front seats for my feet. There's also a low-hanging hump on the floor, but there's hardly any space between the center console and the seat bases, so you won't be able to park your feet on that anyway, unless you've got abnormally small feet. Like I said earlier, throw someone tall into the front seats and you'll have even less space back here. So this one isn't for the growing families and definitely not for adults, although you do get top tether mounts across all seats and ISOFIX points for the outboard seats for kids back here. And speaking of the seats, they're not bad. They're comfortable enough and trimmed in the same faux leather with the same white stitching as the front seats, so they're easy to live with. And forget about any cool features. You don't even get map pockets on both of the front seats, just on the passenger seat, but you do get a USB-C port back here. And no vents for the aircon, bins in the doors, or even cup holders for the rear passengers, so it's as bare bones as it can get. When it comes to cargo space though, you get a manually operated rear tailgate, again, no surprises, with a cargo capacity of 255 litres, which isn't too bad. It's quite a deep cargo floor though, so you'll need to lift anything in here over the rear end when you're taking it out, and there's a little more space under the floor where the spare lives. You can drop the 60-40 split rear seats by pulling the latches on the seats themselves for more cargo space. That goes up to 1,010 litres with the rear seats down. And if you ever wonder what these things are, it's to lock the seat belts in place when the back seats are down. A simple solution that works great. You also get a couple of luggage hooks, and the back seat latches also double up as cargo tie downs to keep things from moving around. And that's about all you'll find back here. So, having shown you everything Kia throws into the Picanto, can this sporty little hatch perform? Absolutely not. This little hatch, although it looks sporty on the outside, it's not fast. And that's because under the hood, we have a 1.2 litre, 4-cylinder, naturally aspirated motor that cranks out 62 kilowatts of power and 122 newton meters of torque. Now I know, massive numbers you say, but no drive modes in this, so really what you get is what you always get. Put your right foot down and it'll take a massive 11.2 seconds to get to 100 k's an hour. Now if you have a manual version of this, it'll actually get there quicker at 10.2 seconds, but this thing, not fast. It does make a lot of noise, just doesn't have a lot of get up and go. I can really only imagine how much fun this car would be had Kia given it maybe a turbocharged engine with a bit more power, a bit more oomph. Oh wait, they've already done that, and it was called the Kia Picanto GT, which they've now axed. Well, in the Australian market anyway. But I digress. This car, for a point A to point B car, does have enough power for it to be useful. I mean, I've driven this through the suburbs, down the highways, down the freeways, and look, it does get up to speed in a very relaxed way, and for a budget car, that's perfectly acceptable. Plus, if you're constantly copping speeding fines, then you can say goodbye to those with this. Okay, it does get up to speed, and you can speed in this car because it's constantly telling me off for doing it, but it's just going to take you a bit longer to get there. But you will get there eventually. And when it comes to the juice, this thing's actually quite efficient. Kia claims 6 litres per 100 kilometre fuel consumption, so you can save your money on speeding tickets and you can save your money on fuel. Then the transmission in here. We have a 4-speed automatic that sends power to the front wheels. It's actually quite smooth, to be honest with you. Even when you do floor it, at the end of it, it changes gears quite smoothly, which actually is quite impressive. Now, speaking of flooring it, when you do floor it, it takes a second to work out what you want to do. It'll drop down a gear, it'll make a whole lot of noise as you would have just heard, and it'll get moving. Moving fast enough. No manual mode in here either, or paddle shifters for that matter. Instead, you can actually choose first, second, or third gear using the gear lever itself, like a old school automatic gearbox. I mean, you could actually drive this thing around like it was a manual using first, second, and third and put into drive when you want to get to fourth, but really, why bother? Now, from a handling perspective, surprisingly, this thing is actually a little bit firmer than I expected it to be. I mean, it's still compliant, but some people might step into this and find it to be a little bit too firm. It is a little sporty-ish. You've got McPherson struts up front, you've got a torsion beam axle on the back, no multi-link suspension. It's not a sports car, even though it does look a bit sporty on the outside. Now, I wouldn't say it's uncomfortable though. I mean, it really does get down the road, absorbing and ironing out the road in front of you. You'll definitely feel potholes in this though, because you're riding on 16-inch wheels and they tend to be smaller than the potholes that I've come across, so you'll feel those. But on main roads or suburban roads, this thing will just glide down the road. It really does feel quite well put together, quite compliant, and honestly, from that point of view, I think the suspension's quite nice in this. Oh, and when it comes to cornering, this thing is not going to carve any corners, and I'm sure that doesn't surprise anybody at this stage. Having said that though, it does go around corners perfectly fine when you're not booting through the corners. Not that you can really boot through a corner in this, but if you do come into a corner with speed, it will understeer. I did go around a roundabout quite a few times in this, and it does slide out a little bit. So having said that though, for everyday use, oh, here's a roundabout. Let's go around this roundabout. Going around the roundabout, there's no cars, and I can feel it sliding out. Yep, it's understeering. It understeers. But for everyday driving, this thing is fine. It gets down the road, gets around corners, and yeah, not a corner carver. Then when it comes to steering, there is a little vagueness off center. I mean, I've got to give this car a little break, people, because at the end of the day, it is a car that costs under $24,000, and cars that are more expensive than that have vagueness off center. So I think this car is doing all right. Now, that aside, it does actually feel quite nimble. And I mean, it has a tare mass of 993 kilograms, which is definitely going to help with that. It doesn't have a ton of feedback, and it's not really precise, but it definitely feels tossable because of the steering in this. It is a very light steering setup. I mean, no drive modes like I mentioned, so you can't stiffen it up. It is very, very light. And what I actually love about this, it has one of the best turning circles ever. It'll do curb to curb in 9.4 meters. So you can't exactly do donuts in this, but you can definitely drive around in circles quite easily. And lastly, we have the brakes. Now, this thing weighs as much as a paperweight at 993 kilograms, so it's light, and it doesn't need massive brakes, but it does have disc brakes on all four corners, vented up front, solid on the back. You do have floating calipers on all four corners as well, so nothing groundbreaking. I mean, it does the job for the weight of this car. Pedal feel is fine, braking power is ample. All in all, the brakes, they work great. So, the Picanto isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea. It's tiny, it's well equipped for what it is, but it's not going to compare to the tech-loaded cars we're used to today. And although it looks sporty and stylish, it isn't exactly fast, although I will say it feels zippy. But this is exactly what people looking for an A to B car want. And with a price tag that's less than 24 grand for a brand new car, that's pretty good value for money if you ask me. But I'm curious about your thoughts, so drop in a comment and let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.